Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Dr. Paul Weiss, President of Oasis Institute. Oasis is a unique entity. It partners with higher ed institutions in multiple ways, including aging research, community involvement, and mentoring, all things that help drive institutions' donor giving. Its vision is to see that adults age 50 and older across the country have opportunities to pursue vibrant, healthy, productive, and meaningful lives. And Paul joins us today to talk about Oasis's network of hundreds of partners that help create town-gown partnerships that drive donor relations and funding. Paul, welcome to the program.
Drumm, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. First, if you wouldn't mind, you're from Oasis. What is Oasis? Tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about Oasis.
So I'll start with Oasis, then I'll talk about me because Oasis is more interesting, but I'll do them both quickly. The Oasis Institute is a national nonprofit. We were founded 42 years ago in St. Louis. We operate with Oasis education centers in several cities around the country. The quick list is Los Angeles, San Diego, Albuquerque, San Antonio, St. Louis, Syracuse, New York, Rochester, New York, and Washington, D.C. We focus on healthy aging and successful aging. We have three primary drivers of that mission, sort of three legs on our stool. Lifelong learning, very broadly conceived, everything you can think of in terms of education for older adults, from practical to recreational to really deep engagement in a concept, an idea, or a history. And we do health programs, evidence-based and evidence-informed, really focusing on community-based health. And we do civic engagement. The largest iteration is an intergenerational literacy tutoring program that operates in 16 states. At peak, we had about 4,500 tutors pre-pandemic, and we're rebuilding to that number. And then we train older adults as community health workers, as instructors in our classes. They support our centers, and we are always looking for new opportunities to engage older adult volunteers. My background is higher ed. I have a PhD in educational psychology from Washington University, and I have used it in odd ways across a career in social enterprise, youth sports, youth development, large-scale community-based facility management, secondary education, and now leading a nonprofit in St. Louis that serves a national audience.
So how did you come? I can easily see your background and how it matches up with both higher ed and Oasis. Tell us a little bit about how Oasis helps higher ed.
Sure. So, Oasis engages with colleges and universities in all of our center cities in a variety of ways. And we engage with several large university research sides in looking at both our participants and our programs. So, for example, in Albuquerque, we draw instructors from University of New Mexico and the community college there. In St. Louis, we have many instructors from Washington University, University of Missouri, St. Louis. In all of our center cities, we have instructional staff who are from the university, sometimes retired, many times current professors and instructors. We also are a research partner. So we just completed a 3-year study funded by the Research Retirement Foundation, looking at the impact of our intergenerational tutoring program on multiple cohorts of our tutors. We did that with the Brown School for Social Work at Washington University. We are just completing a research project looking at a program called Healthy Habits for Adults. Our partner for that was Texas A&M University, a great researcher there. And we're looking at creating an evidence-based model for habit change around food, cooking, and other elements of diet for older adults. And we've had some really good results. But without our university research partners, it's hard to validate what we do provide an evidence-based backbone for what we do, which allows us to be eligible for Title III-D funding, which allows for area agencies on aging and other governmental organizations to use our program to license the content. And our university partners are key to that. And we hope that we provide university researchers with really interesting laboratories for looking at older adulthood, community impact, and health.
This is fascinating to me because I've never heard of an agency such as yours who's developed these kind of partnerships with universities and the community at the same time.
Yeah, I think we fit a very interesting niche in communities in which higher education centers exist because we're very interested in intergenerational relationships. We're very interested in having older adults expand the footprint of their lives. And I think many times a university is interested in connecting with the community beyond the parent and student relationships. And, older adults I'm not saying anything out of school when I say that older adults are the largest source of philanthropy for every organization in a community, including the universities. And so I think our university partnerships, there's some reflection of, well, if we are seen in a certain way by the older adults who this nonprofit engages with, they are possibly going to engage with us. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think if a university is providing value in a community, they should reap the rewards of the philanthropic element of that community, investing in the university and what they do. So I take no truck with that, even though we look for the same source of philanthropy. I think universities are smart to engage older adults and to demonstrate their value to the community and not just be that place that brings kids in.
Are you familiar with Rhodes Scholars, as in ROADS?
Yes, of course.
In some ways, what you're doing, and of course, you've got a bicycle in your background, so
And we have a very robust walking club and bicycling club. So yes, we also do travel. Oasis centers do travel. We do trips all over the place. We're actually doing a very big 2-day overnight adventure to look at the eclipse in rural Missouri with a bunch of older adults. And you can see where that would dovetail with a university providing educational content around the science of eclipses. And it's either astronomy or physics or earth and planetary sciences. We would love to have, to build education around trips like that. So the kind of stuff that Rhodes Scholar does, where they take people out to have adventures in a supported way, Oasis does some of that too. We just try to build an education component around it as well.
absolutely. And one of those things that I think is really neat that you talked about is the lifelong learning aspect. There aren't too many institutions out there, Arizona State being one of them, who really promotes the lifelong learning. This is one of the keys of higher education, is teaching people that innate curiosity that they have to be able to go in and explore things. The degree that someone earns early on in their education may or may not work for their career for their entire life.
Yeah, universities, I think, are increasingly taking at least small nibbles at the notion of this intergenerational relationship that you can have with older adults on your campus. I mean, an example is in St. Louis, University of Missouri. St. Louis has a program, I think it's as cheap as $25 a course, where you can audit for a whole semester. You don't get credit or anything, but you, as an older adult, you can audit for a whole semester, a class, and be in the company of students and participate. That sort of thing, I think, is really meaningful. And to make it so accessible is really a great element of how a community-based higher ed organization is engaging with its community. Oasis can provide some of that structure for a university that doesn't think they have that bandwidth. And we're actually having some interesting conversations around things like our technology literacy curriculum. We have a learning management system, and we can skin it any way we want to represent whoever our partner is. And so we're starting to have these conversations about both our content and our audience with university partners. And half the reason I was excited to be on this podcast is I'd love to see that accelerate.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit, the St. Louis University of Missouri, what's the benefit for them to having the elder folks in classes to audit?
I'm not sure, other than they have a very community focused mission. And I think when it comes to donor development, they're no dummies. The kids who they will seek out through their development department as alumni are going to take 30 to 40 years to develop as real donors. Whereas your 75-year-old who audits a class, develops a relationship with a professor, feels like it's a real bargain, I think they're more likely to be a really interesting philanthropic target. So I think it's a combination of mission and then being rewarded for mission by developing donors you would not ordinarily have if you did not offer them this exceptional experience to participate in learning.
That makes total sense to me. Obviously, donor relations is huge, but it also satisfies the need for elder Americans and others to be able to renew their curiosity, renew their learning, and maybe folks who've retired from a professional nature to be able to go back and learn the newest things that are going on in their previous profession.
Yeah, I mentioned, our technology literacy content, Oasis Connections. We think that's a particularly important and becoming more important element of our lifelong learning mission because nothing can make an older adult feel more alienated by life than technology that's accelerating and that they don't understand and don't feel competent with. And so we think that's really important.
Well, Moore's law, every 18 months, technology doubles, the price cuts in half, et cetera, et cetera. I know certain things are coming out. I'm not bad. I run my own office. I've got tech folks to help me when I get stuck, but there's stuff coming out now. I mean, I had to get somebody to teach me how to use AI, chat GBT. And it's like, this is amazing.
Yeah, and those are the sorts of courses that we're offering. Everything from learning how to use social media to learning how to use Google Mapping. And we have tons of stories of older adults in a class just really going through a transformational experience as they learn to use a new technology, whether it's connecting to family or connecting to ideas. The Google Map piece was fascinating. We had a class on how to use Google Maps and navigation technology. One of the older adults in the class was visibly upset and looked very emotional. And so the instructor engaged with them. It turned out it was a Holocaust survivor. He'd used Google Maps to go find and look at street view and overhead the concentration camp in which he was interned as a child.
Ooh.
And of course, the entire class shifted to him telling the story of his youth. It was incredibly moving for the entire class, but it's an example of where an older adult can connect with things that would be unheard of 30 years ago through using technology, and we can help them do it. That's a particularly poignant example, but we have many of these in our classes where the older adult has sort of their life opens like a flower as they learn to engage technology in ways that they didn't feel competent to do before the class.
And relate that back to how the university was involved with that.
Well, so our technology curriculum, we license, lots of organizations license the curriculum. So it can be library systems, and even we've been talking to two universities about licensing our content and having it offered within community because what older adults need to learn is different than what kids need to learn. So a university may be very well equipped, for example, in an engineering department or something else to teach technology to kids at their entry point, but they might not be equipped to do it at an older adult's entry point, which is wildly different. And so developing a curriculum is hard, but licensing and bringing a curriculum onto your campus to engage a new type of learner, that's not so hard.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the movie Space Cowboys. I don't know if you ever saw that, but
Yeah.
the technology in the space shuttle was very, very different than the lunar module. And the turnover between engineers, people changing jobs, it leaves a dearth there. But more than that, what the universities teach nowadays and what people graduate with is far different than the technology that you and well, I'll say me, I'm not going to say you're not that old. You and I learned as we were growing up.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy for us to forget that learning styles are influenced by a bunch of things, including experience. And what one needs to learn is influenced by that. So I think we can, as Oasis, we have 40 years of experience meeting older adults where they are. whether it's learning art or technology or foreign language. There's a different learning style for a 75-year-old than there is for a 19-year-old.
Hmm.
And they start at different places and they have slightly different brains. That's the place where we are experts. We can definitely help a university understand how you engage an older adult in the things that they really both want and need, and in a way that really fits where they are at cognitively.
Hmm. So, what is, and I want to get into the mentoring aspect because this is one of the big ones that I saw, which is important. But how many relationships with universities does Oasis have?
So we have around the country, we have multiple relationships, and then they vary in terms of sort of type and shape. I mean, for example, one of the things we did in New Mexico with the University of New Mexico Community College is we ran a leadership conference for several years. We did not do it during the pandemic when things were inconvenient, but prior to the pandemic, we ran it for several years. And we attracted this really interesting cross-cultural and intergenerational audience to this leadership conference. And we had great speakers. We had the CEO of the Girl Scouts, the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, who was an engineer. She had actually an aerospace background. And we did a women's leadership piece where we had these unbelievable women. But the audience that we engaged by the community college partnering with Oasis, there is probably a 60-year span of ages in this huge leadership conference audience. And they got to engage with the speakers in ways that would probably be different than it was just single generation. Also, for the community college, it was a bunch of older adults discovering the campus. Why would they step foot on a community college campus? Well, if you bring Oasis members to the community college campus, the first thing they're doing is they're picking up course catalogs, they're looking around, they're checking out the cafeteria, they're looking at this fabulous auditorium, they're looking for more events to go to. So, it was a partnership that was, I think, meaningful because the intergenerational nature of that audience at that leadership conference made the conference better. But also the community college had this tsunami of older adults show up on their campus because they were invited to participate and even help organize the conference. And I don't this is the Bill Maher quote. I don't know it as a fact, but I know it to be true. I am positive we had a positive impact on the way older adults engage with that community college over the years we were doing that conference.
So, this is something that helps colleges with their, I hate to use the term town gown relationships, but that's part of it, but also their perceptions in the community as being a welcoming place for all generations.
Sure. I mean, I think often the university can be a high walled space in which kids exist in an environment that is separate from the community they are living in.
Really? You mean something like an ivory tower? Is that what you're talking about?
Exactly. And this is, when you have a retired or just simply older working adults for whom the university becomes one of those places that is important to your life, I think you're really changing. You're doing two things. You're really changing, obviously, the fabric of the community because you become this really broader serving asset. But the other thing you're doing is you're changing perception. And for public universities, this is key because a public university, they're publicly funded. And who are your most likely people to vote on statewide or local bond issues? Older adults. And so I don't say that casually. We just did this research project funded by the Brown School of Social Work at WashU. And one of the things we looked at was, are older adults more likely to vote for school bond issues if they're involved in the elementary schools in their community? And the answer was a resounding yes. Once they see the school and the kids and they meet the teachers and administrators and they think about the needs of the school, they are much more likely to vote for funding that school, which changes property tax, which increases their local taxes. So they're voting against their financial self-interest because their kids are grown. They have no other reason to invest in the school, and it does increase their cost of living, but they're invested in the community. And I think the universities, especially public, but to some extent private, who need permission to do a variety of things, by creating advocates among older adults, by being meaningfully in their lives, I think that can only benefit them.
Hmm. So, just going back to your Oasis mission again, the lifelong learning, health and wellness, and the civic engagement, intergenerational literacy tutoring. We've talked about the lifelong learning and how critical that is, that partnership between the university, Oasis, and the public. the research aspects of the health and wellness, and we've talked to some degree of civic engagement. The intergenerational literacy tutoring is huge. That is so critical, especially coming out of the pandemic where so many high school, quote, graduates missed 2 years of learning. And some of the professors, some faculty are having a difficult time dealing with this. You've brought in incredible solutions to this.
It's true. And we're growing this program. I mean, actually, as a PSA and solicitation to your university leadership listeners, we are currently developing a quantitative reasoning and mathematics component of our intergenerational tutoring program. We're actually working on a pilot right now with a school district. We will, in short order, be launching this pilot. We will want to scale it. But at the same time, we'd love to have a university partner that's interested in looking at the impact of this mathematics K through third grade educational piece, following these kids long term, looking at how getting this extra help in quantitative reasoning skills affects them with long term and the efficacy of the program. And so we will be in short order looking for a university partner to evaluate this program, because we think the next big learning gap, obviously there's the old saw that's true, that you learn to read from K through third grade, and by fourth grade, you're reading to learn. So we focused on literacy because it was the absolute foundation for all learning that follows and academic and professional success. But as the new economy evolves and more jobs exist in tech that require quantitative reasoning, math, and STEM skills, we think there are fundamental skills that kids K through third grade could also get behind on. And that if they are at or above grade level by the time they hit fourth grade, their trajectory changes. And these quantitative reasoning and foundational mathematical skills that are required in a young brain in ways that are well understood, and we're developing a curriculum to address them, is equally important as literacy. But of course, we need to demonstrate that, and we'd love some research partners to do some work on that with.
So tell us about how your tutoring program works.
We recruit older adults. The average age is 72, though we've had tutors as young as 48 and as old as 99. We train them. There's a 2-day full immersion training, and then we do ongoing in-service trainings and continuing ed on everything from trauma to restorative practices to dyslexia and learning disabilities. But we have a curriculum that ties to multiple state and district learning standards. We have books. We write curriculum for each of those books, though eventually the tutors branch out. Each tutor has a minimum commitment. You must commit for a full year. You must commit to work with one child every week for the school year. However, we tutor a multiple of kids of number of tutors we have. So we have tutors that work with many kids within a school. I mean, in St. Louis, we have one tutor working with 12 different kids. And then the tutors often end up working with the classroom teachers and do a little work in the classroom. So the amount of contact the older adult tutor has with the kids is really intense. And often they're working with multiple children. And we do all of this tutoring. It's not an after-school program. It's during the day. They're in school during the day, which is one of the reasons why older adults are the right lever, the volunteer for this program, is because they're available during the day. And the younger tutors are often moms who are very involved in their kids' lives or are working part-time or from home and can join the program. But it's the average age is 72. The duration of our tutors is remarkable. We have an over 90% retention rate of tutors, and we have multiple tutors that are at 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, and even several 30-year tutors. And again, return back to the notion that our average tutor is 72, and you consider we've had some 30-year tutors. We know there's a health impact. We know that this is really creating this extra piece of their lives that is very sustaining. And these relationships can be quite enduring. We've had multiple stories, though the most intense is the tutor who went to elementary school graduation, middle school graduation, high school graduation, college graduation, and then was a bridesmaid in the child's wedding.
Wow.
And so, if you want to, how sticky are these relationships? Well, they're that sticky. And I think that has real meaning. And what school districts say to us is that filling the learning gap that you just described is very important. And having this extra support in schools to create enthusiasm about reading and learning and words and ideas and communicating is important. But there's a mentorship piece. And, anybody who listens to your podcast has child development in their background, they're an educational PhD, will know the researcher Yuri Bronfenbrenner. I think he's a Russian researcher who wrote that the most important influence in a child's life is a non-parental adult who's irrationally excited about them, which would be every single one of our tutors. You have an adult who's volunteering, who's irrationally excited about seeing a child every week. And the impact that has on the child developmentally is profound.
That is neat. Now, you're also, not only elementary, middle school, high school, but you also tutor college students as well, correct?
We don't tutor college students. So the other interesting thing we do with universities is we take in interns. So we take in health interns. We've had interns for our tutoring program. We've even had some interns around some of our technology pieces. So whether you're a social work student or you're working in education or you're working in some field that might bring you an interest in older adulthood, we do a lot of partnership with universities to bring in this sort of free student talent, and we expose them. We've made some hiring. We've hired some interns that we've taken in, but that's the most significant, direct relationship with a college kid are the interns we take in. And we do that quite often, and they're extremely effective. We hired one who's now a 4-year employee in our health department.
Yeah. One of the things, just an idea, it may work, it may not, but in being able to reach out to colleges and universities and offer the tutoring program to students who are struggling. One of the big things right now is persistence, especially with students coming out who graduated during the pandemic, the loss of learning, etc. They're not quite where they are. The research says that 4 months of tutoring can make up a full year of lost academics. So it could be an opportunity for you. I don't know.
Yeah, well, we have, let's face it, we have this huge population of older adults we reach, of which a relatively small percentage wants to tutor kids K through third grade. So one of the things we've repeatedly discussed, though, and actually we were starting a middle school pilot when the pandemic, is what are the opportunities for different cohorts of Oasis volunteers to work with different age groups that would be more interested to them. So, working with middle school kids, working with college school kids, working with kids at the community college or public university level who might be on the margin of success. That's a different cohort of potential Oasis volunteers who don't want to work in elementary school, but might be thrilled to be involved with someone who's 18, 19, 20 years old. So we'd welcome that. We're looking at all these different ways for older adults to be levers of civic impact, not just to serve them. Successful aging is about feeling purposeful and relevant. For example, one of the programs we're working on developing a pilot for right now is for older adults to work with kids over a multi-year period who are in the foster system. So a kid who's in the foster system, they don't have family. But in many states, they're moved out of the foster system at 18. And there are not a lot of really great safety nets. But one social safety net could be if we can get an older adult involved in a grandparental mentorship way, teaching life skills at 12 and sustain that relationship through their graduation from foster care, you've created a quasi-familiar relationship where you teach the older adult how to get this kid involved in life schools and transition to adulthood and provide this safety net link that can sustain after foster care. We think increasingly older adults can be the lever for social solutions, and that's one of the ones we're thinking of. And of course, improving the graduation rate of college students who are on the margin by having this local adult, especially if the kid is away from home. I think there's meaning there. So I'm very interested in any way the older adult can be that lever for civic impact.
When I was at the Naval Academy my first year, they have a program there called Sponsors, and the local folks open their home to the freshmen, and sometimes that relationship stays throughout the time there. It was very beneficial, place to go out, just kind of be able to relax. You're not under the gun all the time, no pun intended, of course.
Well, I see universities doing lots of interesting things, one of which is co-housing. So there are universities that have their students co-housing with older adults, and it's a mutual benefit. The older adult has someone who's just an extra person in their lives and a young person that sort of increases their social connection. And the college kid gets to have a relationship with an older adult, a place to stay that is not boisterous or loud and distracting, and builds this other relationship with an adult in a place where they can often feel pretty isolated. And so, I think these co-housing things that are happening around the country are very interesting. The listeners to your podcast, I have to think some of them are toying with this student co-housing model. And I think it's very interesting. And I think it's worth a lot more research because I think it has a lot of efficacy on everything from reducing the incidence of ageism, having kids understand what older adults are really like, to creating these stronger ties to the community because you're not just isolated at the university, to changing the perspective of the older adults about who a college kid is.
I think those are all great things. So just kind of as a wrap up and a takeaway, the WIFMs for the universities.
I think we're a terrific partner in part because we have so many different things to offer. We can be a research partner for multiple departments, and we really welcome scrutiny of our work, better understanding our impact. And I think that's key. I think we make a very interesting partner for any of your faculty looking for ways to increase the audience. There is no one as enthusiastic as an Oasis learning audience. Kids are trying to have to meet a bunch of requirements when they're in school. And so, they're focused on getting their engineering degree, but they have to take Psych 101. They're often napping through that class and just making sure they get the stuff they need on the test. When Oasis people show up for a class, they are 100% interested in absorbing everything you have. They've probably read your book. If you're a professor, they've probably Googled you and looked at your papers, and they're probably coming in understanding your research focus and then looking to ask questions as well as learn. It's a very different learning environment. It can be very stimulating. And when they have that good experience with a professor, that is by default a good experience with the university. And then finally, we do a lot of content development. There are places where there might be voids in technology literacy or community-based health for a university. We share our content with lots of organizations, universities included, and would love to expand that.
Mm-hmm. And there's also the outreach and public perception, which I think is huge.
Absolutely. I mean, I think all of these things influence how older adults view the university in their community. And, that can only benefit. As I mentioned before, I'm not pandering to say that's where all the philanthropy lives. It's not with your alumni. Your alumni are too young. They're still working for a living. It's the older adults, and it's the potential to have a legacy gift. That's what really pushes fundraising. And, we know that as an organization that serves older adults, but we get all of them. And we'd be happy to share if the experience that the university is sharing was valuable to those older adults.
Now, this is great. Paul, thank you. 3 takeaways for university presidents and boards.
3 takeaways. You don't just serve kids, you serve communities. And remember that every single person you serve is going to age as well. That older adults are going to be the largest percentage of the population in 2034. There will be the flippening, where older adults over 65 will outnumber kids over 18 for the first time in American history. So if you want to think about what do you need to do in terms of serving a population and remaining relevant, older adults have to be a part of that because the population shift is happening. And I think the third part is older adults are really interesting. Older adulthood, health, education, what it takes to be happy are all things as this demographic shift happens, we are going to be way, way more interested in and are going to be way more important. And we make a great laboratory for looking at that population in a meaningful way and doing research that matters. So we think all 3 of those things are really important.
Oh, I think so as well. I want to thank you so much for being on the program. What's next for you? What's next for Oasis?
Well, we're moving into a new national headquarters in St. Louis. We are building out classrooms. We're building relationships with actually the university partners near our new headquarters. We are looking at expanding our tutoring program. We just launched in Alabama as a new state and are looking at new school districts in Alabama now that we have a foothold with this existing one. And we are increasingly interested in how we can be part of community health in a much broader way: fall prevention, diabetes self-management, chronic disease self-management, and are always looking for university hospital partners to be part of their community benefit.
Great. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being on the program. This hasn't been a typical program for me. It's not totally focused on higher ed and fixing problems, but I think for institutions who really want to improve their community relations want to provide mentoring for their students and other avenues for research, I think this has been great. So thank you so much for taking time to be with me today.
Drumm, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Take care. And then next time you happen to be out here and looking at your Oasis places in Albuquerque, be sure to look me up.
We will hook you up, and we'll get you into a class, more importantly, because, as you said, you're not so young anymore. You're becoming an Oasis person.
Thank you for that reminder. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to Dr. Paul Weiss, president of the Oasis Institute, and for his sharing his insights on how Oasis can partner with higher ed institutions for outreach to the senior community who can become a financial partner to your institution. Join us next week when we welcome Dr. Doug Harrison of New York University to the program. Doug is driving enrollment of first-gen students at NYU, and they have a very unique model that can provide a 2-year NYU degree to students for zero cost. Thanks again for listening. See you next week.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.